am Tamar Ish Shalom, and this is Jewish Crossroads. What do breakups make you do? Some retreat to the couch with a blanket, ice cream, and a movie. Others find solace in friends, family, therapy, maybe a drink. But for Sarah Hurwitz, a breakup led her to rediscover her Jewish identity in a profound way, one that would ultimately inspire her to write a book that can be described as an introduction, a reawakening to Jewish identity for non-affiliated individuals searching for their way home. Sarah Hurwitz is a renowned author and speechwriter, best known for serving as a senior speechwriter for President Barack Obama and later as First Lady Michelle Obama's chief speechwriter. Beforehand, she has worked for both Hillary Clinton and Al Gore. With a career spent crafting powerful messages for some of the most influential figures in the world, she eventually turned her attention inward toward her own heritage, fate, and sense of belonging. Her first book, Here All Along, Finding Meaning, Spirituality, and a Deeper Connection to Life in Judaism, after finally choosing to look there, was published about 6 years ago. And her forthcoming book is titled As a Jew, Reclaiming Our Story from Those Who Blame, Shame, and Try to Erase Us, which explores how antisemitism has influenced Jewish identity and discusses ways Jews can reclaim their narrative. And I'm thrilled to have her with me today. Shalom, Sarah.
Shalom, Tamar. It's so nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Before we jump into anti-Semitism and your new book, let's rewind for a moment to that surprising moment when you began your journey of reconnecting with your Jewish identity.
Yeah, so it's funny listening to your introduction. I did many of those things that you listed that people do after breakups. And, it was funny. I got an email. I broke up. I was 36 years old. I broke up with this guy I've been dating. And I got an email from the local Jewish community center in DC that was advertising an intro to Judaism class. And, I grew up without much Jewish background. Judaism for me was too boring. So, synagogue services at Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and a Seder, which was boring, and Hebrew school, which was boring, and a Hanukkah party, which was great. And that was the Judaism. Judaism was 4 holidays, 3 of which were not that great. So by the time I became a bat mitzvah, I just thought, I'm done. Nothing to see here. I'm a cultural Jew. I'm an ethnic Jew, which is not a thing. Turns out Jews are every ethnicity, every race, but whatever. And so, at age 36, I'm really lonely and anxious. I get this email about this class, and I signed up just to fill time. I was not on some deep spiritual journey. This was not some great awakening. It was just looking to fill a Wednesday night. But what I found in that class was everything I had never seen in a synagogue or in Hebrew school. It was 4,000 years of wisdom about what it means to be human, how to be a good person, how to live a worthy life, how to find profound spiritual connection. And, this was what our tradition offered, all of these texts and this wisdom. And I just felt where has this been all my life? And that started me on this quest to learn about this incredible birthright. I read hundreds of books. I studied with rabbis. I took more classes. And I wanted to write a book sharing what I had learned with other Jews and with anyone who was interested. Not a nuts and bolts how-to book. There are plenty of excellent books like that. And not some esoteric academic book. Plenty of books like that, too. I wanted to have a book that, yes, covers the basics, but is engaging and conversational, but really dives deeply into the most radical, transformational, countercultural wisdom our tradition offers. So, the book is very accessible, but it also has 550 endnotes to ancient texts. So, it's a combination kind of thing.
It's a combination of a yeshiva bocher that read thousands of hours of Jewish texts and just chatting with a good friend that wants to tell you about something new.
That's exactly what I was trying to achieve. So it's funny because a lot of people who grew up like me, they're like, oh, this book was for me. I grew up like you, I related to this. And then a lot of very traditional, observant, learned Jews had said to me, this book is for me. And I'm like, no, it actually was not for you. And they said, no, it is for me. I don't necessarily agree with everything you write. I don't practice like you do, but I see you did your homework. You have a lot of interesting, fresh takes, and you helped me fall in love with our tradition again. So that was really a surprise and a really wonderful.
I want to go back to those boring Sunday school classes, because in the book you talk quite a bit about what you call the problem of pediatric Judaism in American Jewish life. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. And this phrase, pediatric Judaism, it's actually from a rabbi named Larry Hoffman. He coined that phrase. And what I mean is this, we generally stop learning about Judaism at age 12 or 13 when we become a bar bat mitzvah. And that's just when you're ready to start learning the deep, radical, transformational wisdom our tradition offers. But you stop. And then you grow up and you have kids and you realize, like, I don't know anything about Judaism. I stopped learning at age 12. So I'm going to have to just pawn this off on some Hebrew school teacher, and I will demand that that person make my kid Jewish in 2 hours a week, even though I do nothing Jewish at home, nor do I care much, nor do I know anything. That is so unfair to Hebrew school teachers. I wanted to shout out Hebrew school teachers because they are given this impossible task. You don't make a kid Jewish in 2 hours a week. You make a kid Jewish every hours of every day in your home with how you choose to live and how you choose to engage with this tradition. And unfortunately, I will say I had to grow up. I had to become an adult Jew. I was a child Jew and I had to grow up at age 36. And I think that, like so many Jewish adults, we're stuck in this childhood Judaism and we have to grow up. And that is not easy. This is not a tradition that is meant to be pitched on a street corner or put on a bumper sticker. We're talking about millions, hundreds of millions of pages of text from thousands of years of millions of our ancestors. It takes some time. You got to read some books. You got to take a class. You have to do some learning. And it's hard. That's why I wrote my book. I wanted to spare people the thousands of hours of learning I'd done, and I tried to condense it into something you could engage with for 8 to 10 hours and at least have a pretty good sense of how to start learning.
Yeah, because the book really is a move from pretty accurate Judaism to grown-up nature Judaism. What does it require for this leap? I mean, because most people won't have thousands of hours to go, and to delve into Talmudic pages and etc.
Of course not. And look, people are busy. They have jobs. They have families they're caring for. Like, not realistic to expect people to do this kind of work. I think what it requires is understanding the basics of, like, what is Judaism? 10 years ago, if you'd asked me what is the Torah, I'd say it's the thing on the scrolls. It's in Hebrew. It's important and old. That's what I got. If you'd said, what is the Talmud? No idea. Never heard of it. What is the temple? Who were the rabbis? I don't know what you are talking about. And that is the norm. And I know I talk to a lot of rabbis and very engaged, observant Jews, and they don't believe me. But that's the norm. And there are a lot of historical reasons for that. And I write about that in my second book. So what you need to understand just the basics of Jewish history. Where is the Judaism? Like, literally, where is it? Who was involved in developing it? What is the project and process of Jewish tradition? What is our history? And then, like, what are some of the basics that these texts tell us about how to live our lives, how to be human? And so in my book, I really strove to kind of give people what I think is the core fundamental knowledge that you need to get started, right? Mm-hmm. That web of contour and that web of context that you need, where you know enough to realize, okay, I think I got the basics, and now I want to learn more about holidays. I want to learn more about Jewish ethics. I want to learn more about lifestyle rituals. You'll know enough just by reading my book to get started, to kind of go on that journey. But you do need those basics.
You mentioned earlier, and you write about that in your first book, that the idea of ethnic Jews or cultural Jews doesn't really make sense to you. Talk to me a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, ethnic Jews, that's an easy one. There is no one Jewish ethnicity, right? There are Jews of every ethnicity. There are Ashkenazi Jews who have European background, and Mizrahi Jews with background in Arab lands, and Sephardic Jews with backgrounds in the Iberian Peninsula. And then there are Jews who are none of those things. Jews are every race, every ethnicity. So the idea of an ethnic Jew is not really a thing. The idea of a cultural Jew, I mean, I think people, my frustration with this confuses people because they think I'm saying, oh, to be Jewish, you have to be traditionally, halakhically orthodox. No, you don't. I am not traditionally halakhically observant. There are plenty of people who are cultural Jews who have rich, beautiful Jewish lives because they actually care and know about Jewish culture, history, philosophy, food, art, literature. There is a rich Jewish culture and many Jews who are engaged deeply in that. And that is beautiful. That's a gorgeous way to be Jewish. But when I'm talking about I'm just a cultural Jew, I'm talking about myself 10 years ago. What I meant by that was I'm not Christian. I'm kind of anxious and intellectually inclined and believe in social justice and think Seinfeld is funny, ha ha. There are, first of all, lots of non-Jews who share those traits. And second of all, to reduce a 4,000-year tradition to kind of an ethnic joke, it's both ignorant and disrespectful and arrogant. It's a largely contentless kind of identity. So that, like, I'm just a cultural Jew identity that really is held by people who know nothing about Jewish culture. I just think it's pretty meaningless. If I'm being very honest.
Like if cultural Judaism comes without neither the weight of Jewish thought or text nor meaningful Jewish tradition. It boils down to like bagels, lax, and Jewish humor. I mean, not real substance.
Exactly. I mean, it's a misnomer because an actual cultural Jew knows a great deal about Jewish culture. That's a beautiful, deep Jewish identity. But when someone says, I'm just a cultural Jew, that's generally not what they mean.
Throughout the book, you repeatedly emphasize that you're not a scholar, but someone sharing a deeply personal journey, thoughts, conclusions. But you certainly are an A-list expert in speech writing, knowing how to capture the beating heart of ideas and communicate them to a broad audience in a compelling way. So if you were advising Jewish leaders today, those trying to engage young American Jews at this critical moment in history, what would be your pitch? I mean, what's the right narrative? What is the best story we can tell at this moment?
I love this question. What I see so many Jews of all ages doing today is looking for meaning, looking for a good way to live their life. And they find that in many interesting places: Buddhism, the self help aisle, therapy, Burning Man, all kinds of self constructed spiritualities. And lovely, right? There's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of beauty in many traditions and many practices out there. But the one place they don't look is Judaism, which is so heartbreaking because we have 4,000 years of that kind of wisdom. And I would just gently suggest that, 4,000 years of wisdom from millions of our ancestors might perhaps have more to say than that one guy who has a website and calls himself a guru. I don't know. I could be wrong, but that's just my sense. But the problem is that stuff, it's not very accessible. And that wisdom, that meaningful stuff, it's not what you're going to see if you're an average American Jew. An average American Jew, the Judaism that's presented to you is 3 major holidays: Hanukkah, and maybe a Jewish wedding, maybe a bar b'nai mitzvah for your kid, maybe some death rituals, maybe not. That's what you see. You're not going to see any of the wisdom and the search for meaning and how to be human. You really won't see that in the parts of the tradition that are shown to you. That's a real loss. So if I'm thinking about how am I going to reach people, what I'm going to say is, look, I know you're struggling right now. You're looking for, like, how do you be human, especially at this absolutely wrenching, difficult time. Well, okay, let me tell you what Judaism has to say about, how should you be a parent? How should you be a spouse? How should you be a son or daughter? How you be a friend to someone? What does it mean to actually be good? What does it mean? How should you help people who are struggling? Not just give to the poor, not just tikkun olam or tzedakah. I mean, we have these very simplified notions of what it means to be a good person, but Jewish tradition is actually very deep and complex and rich about this stuff. I mean, think about the texts I like to use that are very basic Jewish texts that I certainly didn't know about 10 years ago was, this idea that if you are in a store and you have no intention of buying anything, you shouldn't ask an employee for the price of an item because you're going to get their hopes up unfairly. You're going to waste their time. That's actually really unkind to that person. Or, if you've loaned money to someone who's financially struggling and a few weeks later you happen to see them coming down the street towards you, you should actually try not to run into them, because if you know they still can't pay you back, if you run into them, it's going to embarrass them, right? It's going to kind of humiliate them. So just don't do it. And so, you could say, well, why not just say give to the poor or be kind to workers? Why these specific, nitpicky, weedy situations? And what I would tell you is that Jewish law, the specificity, the details of Jewish law, it's trying to inculcate this kind of sensibility where you are just exquisitely sensitive to the needs and dignity and humanity of other people. It's like, put yourselves in the shoes of that shop owner and really think, like, what are they feeling right now? Really, it's like training you to do that. It's sort of it's like going to the eye doctor when they click the machine to make your vision clearer and clearer. It's this kind of moral training to make you see people in front of you more and more clearly. It's this sort of like character training. It's this like training in how to be a good person that the secular world doesn't really offer. In fact, what the secular world often offers is the exact opposite, which is like divide people up into oppressors and oppressed and hate and like them accordingly. Like, click the vision machine backwards till all you can see is just 2 blurry blobs, and then hate or love them accordingly, which is so dehumanizing. So
And no nuance.
No nuance. No, and like, Judaism offers so much countercultural wisdom for how to be human. So I would really start with, like, okay, what are you struggling with right now? And here's the wisdom Judaism offers. And by the way, it's challenging. Some of it actually demands that you live up to a higher standard than you would hold yourself. It's not just an affirmation of how great you are. It's not going to be this kind of self-help, like you're great, you're the best, do you, self-care, it's all about you, it's actually going to demand a lot from you.
Much more
And
about the other than you.
exactly. And like, guess what? I think Jews can rise to that, right? I think Jews are looking for that. And I don't know why we're so afraid to give it to them. You know, it's almost like we just want to kind of keep feeding them self-help that's making us all so miserable. And I think that we offer something better in Jewish tradition. So I'd really start with that wisdom about what it means to be human. And by the way, community is also wonderful, and celebrating holidays and life cycle rituals, all of that is wonderful. I just think that's more accessible right now than the wisdom of our tradition.
That we need to add to the whole
Yeah.
community thing. You know, in your previous book, there was, I think, just one paragraph about anti-Semitism, because quite clearly that book was dedicated to what Judaism is in positive terms, its richness, wisdom, and everything it has to offer. Then came October 7th, followed by a surge of anti-Semitism, including here in the US. What led you to feel an urgency to write about it now in your upcoming book?
Well, the amazing thing is I actually sold my book well before October 7th, and I was actually writing about these issues probably a year or two before October 7th.
Oh, wow. I
Really
didn't
since
know that.
2020. Yeah, really since 2021, I've noticed a shift in America, and it's been the rise of kind of a left-wing anti-Semitism in addition to this very serious right-wing anti-Semitism. They are both bad. Let's be clear. I hate it when people claim that only on the other side are the anti-Semites. My side is perfect. No, no. Anti-Semitism is everywhere, unfortunately. You know, what really struck me, number one, I read Dara Horn's book, People Love Dead Jews. I found that very radicalizing. Number two, I visited a college campus in 2022. You know, I was just there to chat with the kids, you know, the Hillel students. It was very lovely. And a girl raised her hand and asked me, what did you do about anti-Semitism when you were in college? And I said, what? Like, I actually didn't understand the question. It took me a minute. And I said, I did nothing because there was none. I went to Harvard in the 1990s. Like, I could have run through Harvard Yard screaming, I'm a Zionist, wrapped in an Israeli flag, and people would have just shrugged. And this girl said, oh. She said, well, I told a classmate of mine that I went to Hebrew school as a kid, and she screamed Free Palestine in my face. And I said, what? And I was like, wait a second, how many of you have felt uncomfortable on this campus because you're a Jew? And like about half the kids raised their hands. And I thought, wait a second. And so I asked Hillel to send me on a college tour, and they did. And the college tour started October 10th of 2023.
What a timing.
Yeah, what timing. So it was, you know, we'd arranged it in August. So again, I was sort of thinking about all of this. You know, I think it was the Israel-Hamas war of 2021 that just the response to that online, there was something different. Something had kind of shifted. Again, not new, but had really crystallized. And I just thought, this is a real problem. And I was also started to ask the question, why did I see none of this profound Jewish wisdom in my Jewish upbringing? Like, why was my Jewish upbringing, you know, 4 holidays in Hebrew school? And so I started learning Jewish history much more deeply. And, you know, I came to realize that there are historical reasons for the Judaism that I grew up with, which is a highly edited kind of Judaism. And I don't think that that was freely chosen in many ways. I wanted Jews to understand how colonized our Jewish identities have been by 2,000 years of Christian anti-Judaism, of anti-Semitism, of the Christian hegemony that we live with in America. I wanted to really try to strip away some of those layers that kind of put a lens on how we see ourselves as Jews, strip those away so that we can approach Jewish tradition on Jewish terms through Jewish eyes with, you know, pride and joy and excitement rather than shame and fear and disdain.
And it's a fascinating approach to looking at how centuries of both overt and subtle anti-Semitism shaped not just the anti-Semites, but us. I mean, our Jewish
Yes.
psyche. What did you discover while working on this book?
So I really, you know, I studying European Jewish history, and obviously many Jews are not European, right? About a quarter of the world's Jews do not have roots in Europe. Half of Israeli Jews are not European. So I want to be clear, this is quite an Ashkenormative perspective that I have because I'm an American Jew, and the vast majority of American Jews do have European roots. So I want to just name that. But, you know, looking at this moment in Europe in the 1800s where Jews were finally getting citizenship in the countries that they were living in, but there was a bargain that they had to accept to get that citizenship. They had to find a way to, you know, become Jews in the modern world. And, you know, there were reformers who, you know, in order to fit in Europe, in order to be both Jewish and a Frenchman and a German, they really did have to reshape Judaism. And what they did was quite extraordinary. I'm really incredibly grateful for how they managed to bring Judaism into the modern world. But the ways in which they did so, they did in some ways kind of take a Protestant cookie cutter and jam it into Judaism and get rid of a lot of what didn't fit. So the Judaism that resulted was a kind of highly edited kind of Judaism that, thank God, got us through to modernity. It has lasted to today. Like, I'm a Jew today because those brave reformers did what they did, but they were operating in a time that, they were surrounded by people who despised them, who thought they were disgusting. And that, I think, did in some ways shape their thinking. And so we lost something there. And by the way, as a reaction to them in the 1800s, another group of Jews said, no way, we are not, Judaism is about not changing anything. It became called orthodoxy. And that's another kind of modern invention, which I think also had some costs. And then you have the conservative movement. That's a reaction to those two. These dominations are wonderful, right? They've taken us into the modern world. They are in many ways thriving still today. And they were of a certain time and place. And I think that while they have so many benefits and have gotten us so far, I do think they came with costs. I almost wish we could go back to the 1800s and say, okay, we need to transition to modernity. We are going to have to radically rethink Judaism, but to do so without that kind of being surrounded by people who hate us.
If we could do it on our terms, not theirs.
Yeah, on our terms. And by the way, this is not my original idea. Tens of thousands of Jews have been doing this for years, who are saying, wait a second, okay, these denominations are wonderful, and maybe there's another way to think about this. So you're seeing all this creativity in the last 20 or 30 years of Jews just trying all kinds of things, reclaiming tradition. I mean, I'm very inspired by so many Jews who've come before me and who are operating now. So I'm really telling their story. This isn't really mine. It's like the story of all these creative, thoughtful Jews who are realizing, okay, these amazing things that got us into modernity, we can actually let go of some of this. We can actually go back and reclaim some of what we've lost.
Why do you think that, at least until October 7th, diaspora Jews, American Jews tended to downplay anti-Semitism, not viewing it at all as a force that shaped their own Jewish identity?
What's so interesting is I was talking to a friend of mine who grew up in a small town in Texas. And I was saying, it's so amazing. There was just no anti-Semitism in the 80s and 90s. And she said, what are you talking about? I spent my entire childhood getting beaten up because I was Jewish. And I thought like, oh, wow. I think a lot of Jews have lived in places where anti-Semitism was not so prominent, right? Most of us has lived in blue states where right-wing anti-Semitism is not a part of our daily life the way that many Jews who live elsewhere really is. And the Jews who have lived in these more comfortable places have thought like, oh, anti-Semitism, thing of the past, it's gone. And now that anti-Semitism has become so prominent on the left, suddenly it's in our circles. Suddenly it's our friends. It's in our social media feeds. And I feel like my friend is like, welcome to the party, Sarah. Welcome to
welcome out of the bubble.
Right, exactly. And I think we've begun to realize like, oh, wait a second, this does exist. And I want to be careful about acting like this is the American norm. Anti-Semitism is not the American norm. I was sort of in that bubble of everyone hates Jews. And then last summer, I spoke at a conference of 1,600 high school kids in Missouri who were learning about civics in this wonderful program called Boys and Girls State. And the organizers, they said, you should talk about your Jewishness and your tradition. That's so wonderful. Like, the kids will love that. That's so important to them. And I was like, wait, really? I said, yes. Why wouldn't you talk about that? It's an important part of your life. And then one of the kids asked me about the day that Osama bin Laden, that we took him out, that Obama killed him, had him killed. And that was, they said to me, what was that like in the White House that day? And before I could answer, 1,600 Missourian teenagers started cheering. And I thought like, wait, you guys are against Islamist terrorism, like very much against it. When you're operating in this kind of bubble of college campuses and progressivism, you get a very warped sense of what normal Americans think. Normal Americans do not like terrorism. Normal Americans do not sit around obsessing about Jews. I still think this is the exception, not the norm in America, but man, is it widespread. Man, is it worse than it's been. We had a great vacation from history for 80 years. It was a delight, really enjoyed it, and now it's over.
And I think there is a strong parallel between how many diaspora Jews have historically in a way, downplayed the role of anti-Semitism in shaping their Jewish identity and how Israelis often frame the birth of Israel. Because Zionism is typically discussed by us, Israelis, in terms of positive values. I mean, nation building, self-determination, providing a safe homeland for Jews. And obviously, that's all true and important. But when you look at Theodor Herzl's writings and biography, it's clear that his Zionist revelation was deeply tied to his encounter with anti-Semitism. So that historical reality is undeniable. And at the same time, no one wants to root their national identity, in our case, or religious identity, in diaspora Jews' case, to something negative as anti-Semitism, right?
Right. Why should we have to? Every other people gets a nation based on their peoplehood, right? Based on their national identity, which is a positive thing. So I don't know why Jews should have to be different from all other peoples. We can have a national identity based on our positive identity. And I also think, when I'm talking to people about why I care about Israel, this is a question a student, brilliant young woman just asked me at a college campus I visited the other day. She said, tell me why you care. Tell me why this is important. And I said two things. Number one, we've run that experiment of Jewish powerlessness for 2,000 years. It did not go well. I find these Jews who kind of have this romantic idea of exile. Oh, the beauty of exile was so wonderful. Yes, we survived, as best we could in exile. We created many beautiful communities and things. I'm so proud of us. And they also slaughtered us pretty regularly. I'm uninterested in returning to exile. Uninterested. If the world were nice to us, sure, great, live in diaspora, beautiful. It didn't work. So that's number one. And number two, I think a lot of American Jews misunderstand what a Jew is. They think Judaism is a race or ethnicity or religion. It is none of those things. Okay, Jews predate those categories. We are whatever the Ammonites and the Hittites and the Edomites are. They're all gone. We're still here. So what are we? I don't know, a tribe, a people, a family, a civilization, a nation, whatever we are. We're not just people who share the same religion or ideology. So the way I see it, half my family lives in Israel. Half my people, half my tribe lives in Israel. So yeah, I care a lot about half of my people, half of my family. So it is a combination of, I should actually have reordered those. Number one, half my family is in Israel, so I care about my family. And number two, we ran the experiment of Jewish powerlessness a lot. We tried it again and again. It did not work, and I'm uninterested. I know where it leads. I know the result.
And for Israelis, half of the family, the date is October 7th. But for American Jews, it's also October 7th, but in many ways, it's just as much October 8th.
Yeah.
Take me back to those first days after. What was that experience like for you as an American Jew? And did it hit home on a personal level?
I felt so confused by existing in America because, the world was going on and my world had stopped. I couldn't understand. Everyone was just living this normal life, whereas I and my Jewish friends and family, we are on text chains 24 hours. No one's sleeping. It's 3 a.m. You text someone, they text you right back. It was just this sense of oh my God, what's happened to Emily? What's happened to Lilia Ellie? We're just so, these are our family members. We were just, it was just 24/7. And, it was funny. I couldn't socialize like a normal person, because I was so sensitive to anyone who just didn't understand what was going on. And I really found myself kind of just pleading with people who didn't understand, making all these ridiculous arguments. Remember 9/11 when we were attacked, we retaliated. And it just got to the point where I was like, this is humiliating that I actually have to do this. I was like, this is humiliating. I'm not going to, basically the argument I was making was Israel is a country and Jews have bodies. And after a while, I just thought, this is humiliating. I'm no longer making this argument. If people get it, they get it. If not, I think I'm just taking a break. And I felt like I had moved into a little shtetl in my mind where I kind of knew where everyone lived in relation to my shtetl, And by the way, a lot of non-Jews live in my shtetl. I joke that the mayor of my shtetl is this wonderful Canadian Presbyterian minister whose life mission is to fight anti-Semitism in the church. He knows more about Jewish history than I do. He's learning Yiddish because he thinks it's disrespectful to read Holocaust literature in translation. He thinks it's disrespectful. He's the mayor of my shtetl. So it's not a Jewish, non-Jewish thing, but I knew who lives inside, who lives just outside, who lives a little further away, but will text me when the Cossacks come, who are the Cossacks. It was a reorientation of my internal landscape. And I kind of lived there for a while, actually. It was many, many months. And I think, frankly, going and talking to these teenagers in Missouri was actually a moment of realizing, wait a second, no, I'm not in a shtetl. I'm in America. And yeah, I might be in an ugly part of America because of, the circles in which I used to travel, but I think it was a realization that I need to recalibrate this a little bit. But yeah, it was just a shattering event. And I think it wasn't so shocking for me because I've been thinking about this since 2021. So I kind of wasn't super shocked or surprised, but man, was I angry.
In your first book, you dedicate quite a few pages to Jewish activism and social justice as a central part of American Jewish identity. I mean, for more than half a century, there's hardly been a social cause or minority group that Jews haven't stood alongside. And as you write, for so many in the community, this is like an intrinsic part of their Jewish identity. But when October 7th came and the wave of anti-Semitism that followed, for the first time, many American Jews found themselves in need of support, of protection, only to feel that almost no one showed up for them. For some, it felt like a deep betrayal. I mean, how do you make sense of this moment?
Yeah, I mean, I felt similarly. I mean, I think, Van Jones, who's a really brilliant sort of public figure and commentator, he's been speaking really just incredibly helpfully on this. And he was talking, I talked to him recently and I've heard him speak recently about the Black community. And this, I think, is true for a lot of other communities as well. Israel's hard to understand. When you just are on TikTok and social media, when you're not well read, he made the point that Israel looks like Goliath. That's what it looks like. If you're just watching certain news channels, you're just on TikTok, it's actually hard to understand what's happening. You actually have to know some history. You actually have to know some context. It's not obvious. What you and I see, the average person doesn't see because they don't know anything. And suddenly they're commenting on something they know nothing about. And, he also made a very interesting point about our social media feeds. You and I, for weeks, saw nothing but the Bibas family. And that horrific, that to me, it was that was my mind for weeks. And he said, other people's social feeds, they have no idea who the Bibas family is. They don't know what Hamas is. They don't know any of this. So we are living with a very different set of information, of knowledge, of context, of history. So what seems very obvious to us is actually not obvious to a lot of other people. And I like to think, and maybe I'm wrong, I like to think if people actually had this education, maybe, just maybe, some of them would change their minds. The hardcore ideologues will not. They are anti-Semites. They are not changing their minds. Their anti-Semitism is impervious to facts or reason. But I do think there are people out there who just aren't that educated, who don't really know what's happening, who are going with the flow, reposting the thing because it's the thing that you repost, but who actually, if they knew something, would maybe take a step back. Maybe they're not going to stand up and speak out, but maybe they're going to not repost that thing because they realize, ooh, it's a little more complicated. Actually, no, Hamas is not a liberation organization. I think that is true. But look, I'll tell you, on the hard left, there is a lot of there are ideologues and there is hardcore anti-Semitism. Period. I've seen it. It is there.
How much of a heartbreak was it for you to see that?
I mean, it was a heartbreak, but it wasn't. But my heart had already started to break in 2021. So if anything, it was sort of, I didn't have that shock of I can't believe it. It wasn't new to me. I'd been following this for a while. So I think there was that heartbreak. It was more anger, honestly. I was more angry. And I also, having been reading history, I was like, wow, y'all are just cliches of history. You were such a cliche. It's the same garbage. The least that anti-Semites could do is get a new set of tropes. It's the same crap that was injected into
Why should they? It works so well for them.
I mean, it works so well. It's true. It's it's funny. It's this neural groove of Jews as preternaturally powerful, controlling everything, totally depraved, disgusting, diabolical, perverse, and in a conspiracy. They're all working together behind the scenes. And it's that is a canyon-sized neural groove that has been worn into the world's psyche. And it's not hard to push someone into a canyon. I think this is what we're seeing. It's that kindling is always there. You can always light that match, right? And the idea that we're going to fight anti-Semitism, I think is adorable, right? There are 16 million of us with an M. That's the 5th largest city in China. Girl, we're a Chinese city, and we're we're going to end anti-Semitism. No, we're not, okay? Anti-Jewish ideas are woven into the religious traditions to which half of the world's 800 billion people subscribe. Okay, anti-Semitism comes and goes based on economic insecurity, fear. There's a lot of things. And sure, there's stuff we can do to fight it, but I think instead of trying to bail out a tsunami, we should build an ark. I really think it would be a good idea for us to be focused on being proud, passionate, amazing Jews. And by the way, that's the best way to fight anti-Semitism as well. showing the world what a Jew is, who a Jew is. And just to bring myself back to the progressive world, when I hear people like Van Jones, people like Brianna Wu, who's an amazing woman, who's, she was a progressive activist for many years, very active in, trans activism. And after October 7th, she said she saw the progressive world abandon Jews. And she said, wait a second, because she said, like, the therapist she had when she was coming out as trans was a Jew. The dean at her college, University of Mississippi, who fought for her and helped her was a Jew. And she said, wait a second. And she said, all the people who've been marching for me were Jews. Like, we're not going to abandon them. And so if we take our marbles and go home and there are no Jews in the progressive world, we're not going to have Brianna Wu and Van Jones. So I think this idea that we have to totally step out of these spaces is wrong. I actually think it's great to see there's now a Jewish abortion, a nonprofit that is fighting for abortion rights from a Jewish lens, and amazing, right? We can do that too.
You mentioned that you went to Harvard. You have 2 degrees from Harvard. Seeing what unfolded at Harvard and other Ivy League schools after October 7th, did it change the way you see your alma mater?
Yes. Yeah, it really did. It just revealed to me some real rot at the heart of academia. I'm just going to be very blunt. I mean, there is something that's taken many years to develop and take hold. And I don't want to generalize too much. The science and technology and engineering and math, the STEM departments are really not very affected by this. I think these schools there are parts of these schools, it's very department by department. But just seeing that rot and just seeing the ideology, the indoctrination of students rather than the teaching of critical thinking, it was really stunning to me. And I just the bloom is off the rose for me, frankly. Looking at a lot of these elite schools, I am no longer impressed with them. I no longer think they are a great education. I spoke at West Point, and that is a great education. The professors there were so proud to tell me, they said to me, our students have no idea what our politics are, because if they did, then we are failing. That is unprofessional. My job is that if they say X, I'm going to come right back at them with the opposite of X. And if they argue the opposite of X, I'm coming right back at them with X. That's my job. It's to make them critical thinkers. It's to challenge them, push them. It is not to impose my views on them. And I almost started crying. I was so stunned, and they're looking at me like I'm crying. I mean, it was just a totally wild experience to realize, like, that's education. That's an education. And anywhere where professors are indoctrinating students, just spewing their opinions at them, that's not education. Right? So I'm just, the bloom is really off the rose. I'm much more, West Point, I just thought was a shining example of what education could be. And basically, the closer a school is to West Point, the more impressed I am by it. The further away it is, the less impressed I am.
Interestingly, Jewish basic idea is of discussion, arguing, agreeing, disagreeing. These and those are the words of the living gods. Ele ve'ele divrei Elohim chaim.
Look, Jewish tradition is not about dogma. It is about dialogue and dialectic. Any Jewish debate you have, you are going to be holding 2 opposing truths. And you have to hold both of them. If you are 100% with one or the other, you are doing it wrong. Extremism is not Jewish. It's just not. Because if you're 100% with one truth, then you are ignoring another one. Like, yes, we have to be aware of Amalek. We have enemies. They're going to get us where we're weak. And actually, we also have to love the stranger and care about the stranger. Both of those things are true. You cannot reject one or the other. You have to hold them both. And that is quite hard.
Is that the biggest
very, very
change that you've noticed compared to when you were in Harvard? The dogmatism?
Back in the 90s, I think I could see the roots of it. There certainly was some of that. But I think it was better. And I just don't recall my professors. I don't think I could have told you what any of my professors' politics were or ideology was. That just didn't. And I took political science classes, social theory classes. I wasn't a science major. I was a social science, humanities major. So I think it has changed.
We've reached our Jewish questionnaire, Sarah. These are 5 quick and fun questions for every guest. Are you ready?
Yes, but I will warn you, I'm terrible at this lightning round thing. I'm just going to warn you in advance. So I'll do my best.
Take all the time you need. What's your earliest Jewish memory as a child?
Oh, I think earliest is probably Hebrew school, or maybe the Hanukkah party we used to have with family friends. That was a great Jewish tradition.
If you could meet any Jewish figure from the distant or recent past, who would it be and why?
Oh, wow. That is a really tough one. Can it be, like biblical? Can it be like anything? Really?
We are a very pluralistic podcast.
Okay, so people might push back on me, but I think, well, no, they're Egyptian. Okay. It's so funny. When I think about the biblical figures I want to meet, it's the non-Jews who helped us. I'm very curious about them, about like the Egyptian. Okay, you know what?
That's a great answer. Okay, look, we're a pluralistic podcast, so it could be non-Jew
Yes.
as well.
So they're in our Jewish text. So I would want to meet the midwives who saved Moses, who I think are, there's debate. Are they Jewish? Are they Egyptian? I think from the text, it seems to me clear they were Egyptian. I want to meet Pharaoh's daughter who rescues Moses. I want to meet Yitro, like these amazing non-Jews who are such a critical part of our family. I mean, if you actually look, the Torah really, it's not very, the Israelites are not really depicted as these great heroic characters in the Torah, but these non-Jewish figures really are portrayed as quite heroic and quite noble and brave. So I would like to meet some of them.
Nice. What is your favorite or most meaningful Jewish tradition?
I love study. I love chavruta. I love studying Jewish texts in partnership because I always get so much smarter. My chavruta always teaches me something. We always figure things out together that I simply could not figure out by myself. And I love that way of studying.
If you could jump 100 years into the future in one sentence, what would you hope to see for the Jewish people?
I would hope to see Jews becoming deeply learned in Jewish traditions, educated in Jewish texts, ideas, thought, tradition. And I don't care how people practice. It's none of my business. There's so many different ways to practice this tradition. There's so many different ways to be an engaged, passionate Jew. And I think this was Rav Kook's idea, but I'm not sure, this idea of the Jewish people as a body, where you don't say, well, the lungs are more important than the heart and the spleen's not. Every organ is vital for the body to survive. You need a healthy spleen and liver and heart and lungs and stomach. And so I love the idea of the Jewish world as being like that. You need healthy Haredi Jews and healthy secular Israeli Jews and healthy Reform, conservative. Every part of the body needs to be healthy. But for that, they all need to be learned and they all need to be making an informed choice about how they practice. That's what I would want.
Finally, one Jewish word that feels particularly meaningful to you at this moment. It can be in Hebrew, English, Yiddish, whatever.
Mishpacha, family. Love that. I think that word really speaks to me right now.
Mishpacha,
Sure.
indeed, in so many levels. Sarah, thank you so much for this lovely conversation. Toda.
Thank you. It was such a total joy. I really love talking with you.
That's it for this episode of Jewish Crossroads. We'd love to hear from you, so feel free to write to us at jewishcrossroadspod@gmail.com. Thank you to Tomer Atzabi Bar, who edited this chapter. We'll see you next time, same place, same journey, with a new voice. See you soon.